May I request everyone to be please seated now? Our time has started for the next session. I hope now everybody is refreshed with a cup of coffee or tea to get to the next session. So, before I start the session, I would also like to announce that we have parallel sessions going on here. One is on creating a LNG market in the Indo-Pacific. This session is going on in the Mumtaz room. If anybody is interested, they can attend that session. Another session is on renewable energy opportunities. This session is going on in the Jahangir room. So if any of you is interested in attending these sessions, you are most welcome to attend them. And we start with the next session of our day, which is facilitating cross-border electricity trade for growth. May I please request everybody to be seated? Yes, for this session, I would like to call upon Mr. Michael Satin, Director, Clean Energy and Environment Office, U.S. Agency for International Development, India. Okay. And also the speakers, Mr. Tilak, could you please come on the stage? Mr. Anil, Mr. Sanjay, Mr. Deepesh Nanda, and Mr. Mohammad Hossain. I request all our speakers to please come over to the stage. Thanks, hi. Michael. Hi, Michael. Okay, you have your coffee. So Michael is also with us, and he would take over the stage now. Michael would be introducing briefly our speakers, and then he would start with the session. Can all the people who are seated at the back please move in the front rows?
Let me try. Exactly as it is. Okay, don't tell me. Don't tell me. Siyambalapitiya? Oh my gosh. Go ahead. Pat me on the back. Good afternoon.
Michael.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Appreciate it. This is the best panel of the entire 2 days. I just want to let you know that, because everybody who's not here in the room, I want you to go back and share that with them. Let them know what they missed. This is also the best time slot to be hosting a panel and be a part of it, because we know that everybody who's in the room at this time really wants to be here. And so we are excited to bring to you, I believe, what is the final panel of the 2-day conference on connectivity here in South Asia. I hope that in many ways you have found the rest of the 2 days fulfilling and productive and added value to your own work and the work you're doing here in South Asia. We're talking today, this is the Parallel Track 3A panel, and we are talking about facilitating cross-border electricity trade for growth. That sounds like a very broad subject, and we are very fortunate to have a number of experts that touch on a good many of the subsectors of this particular subject matter. So without further ado, and because I want to give everybody ample time to both present their perspectives here and also for members of the audience to pose their questions, I'm sure you know that there is online opportunity to pose questions up here. So if you things that are coming to mind during the conversation, please go on your mobile and put those into the website, and we'll make every effort to address them. Let me start off by introducing an energy consultant from Sri Lanka who's been a driving force in cross-border energy trade and is really one of the regional experts. We're very, very fortunate to have Tilak Siyambalapitiya with us today. Thank you for being with us, Mr. Tilak. We are also equally fortunate to have from the Nepal Electricity Authority, the Deputy Managing Director, Anil Rajbhandary. We're very fortunate to have you with us as well, sir. Thank you for being here. A colleague of mine at the Millennium Challenge Corporation from the US government, Sanjay Poudyal, is the Deputy Resident Country Director based in Kathmandu. Sanjay, thanks for making the trip down here. We are excited to have the Chief Executive Officer of Gas Power Systems South Asia from General Electric Power with us, Deepesh Nanda. Deepesh, thank you so much for being a part of this today. And certainly not least, Mohammad Hossain, who's the Director General, Power Cell Power Division at the Ministry of Power, Energy and Mineral Resources, the government of Bangladesh, based in Dhaka. It is certainly the case that in cross-border energy trade, South Asia is challenging, but yet very, very interesting opportunity to think about how individual countries use their natural resources, how they develop their own internal energy security systems, and then how they use those opportunities as stepping stones to trade energy across borders with their neighbors throughout the region. The challenges, of course, are numerous. The policy environment is anything but clear. The regulatory climate for cross-border energy trade is emerging or evolving, but it is not yet fundamentally in place in a concrete way. And yet the resources are plentiful. The opportunities for trade are great. We know that the benefits to trade across borders in the electricity area are significant. My organization at USAID, we've done a number of studies looking at cross-border trade, mostly bilateral between India and Nepal, between Nepal, Bhutan, and Bangladesh, between Bangladesh and India, and a number of other sort of quick looks, and all of them kind of come to similar conclusions. There's great opportunity for trade, there are significant benefits to trade, and it helps to reconnect or connect the South Asia region in a way that other trade may not get to. And so without further ado, I'll leave my comments there, but I would like to ask each of our participants to take, let's call it 7 to 10 minutes, talk first a little bit about your experiences in cross-border energy trade, perhaps focus in on what you've seen as some of the challenges, and just as importantly, some of the successes and opportunities for the future. I know that's a very broad subject matter, but I think it gives you lateral room to kind of discuss your own experience and your own organization. Is that good? Okay. Are you guys ready? Because this is going to be good. All right. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Thanks very much, Michael. So my name is Tilak. I come from Sri Lanka. So I believe, as Michael requested, I will first talk about my experience with regard to the proposed India-Sri Lanka interconnection. So for your information, Sri Lanka and India are not interconnected as yet. So of course, when I graduated more than 30 years ago, they told me that India and Sri Lanka is going to be interconnected a year later. So more than 30 years later, we are still talking about it. So many things have happened, and there have been very extensive studies, starting from the USAID study that you mentioned, into a more detailed feasibility study in the 2011-2013 period. Again, a fairly long period of quietness, and suddenly, over the last few months, it has fired up again. So, but let me summarize the issues. Countries go from surplus to deficit and deficit to surplus. So when I led the feasibility study team in 2011, Sri Lanka was surplus, southern India was deficit. And now we are seeing a situation that southern India is gradually becoming surplus and Sri Lanka becoming deficit. So the commercial considerations which have to be very carefully included in possible contracts are always changing. So this is a particular fact. Similarly, I'm sure Bangladesh also is presently deficit, but most likely in a few years becoming surplus as well. So these considerations are more important. Of course, the general benefits of grid interconnection, such as sharing surplus capacity, sharing spinning reserve, particularly if it is a AC interconnection, and also sharing renewable energy, which is available plenty in certain parts of the Southern Asian market, whereas the other segments of the Southern Asian market is using fossil fuels heavily. So to facilitate all these interconnections, grid interconnections are considered to be good. So, but then what are the challenges? What are the challenges for Sri Lanka to connect with India? Unlike other countries, our interconnection has to be across strait, which at least should be 40 kilometers across the sea. So it can be AC, or most likely it will be DC, which has its own challenges, but benefits as well. So the technical challenges. And secondly, I would consider the difference in the way the two markets are managed. Indian market, to the credit of the people who actually set it up, are to a great degree liberalized. Whereas Sri Lanka and perhaps most of the other markets around India are not liberalized, which I mean that generation is licensed, and whereas in India, generation does not require a license. And Power Trading Corporation and similar arrangements are there to secure contracts or to manage contracts for the transfer of power. So the differences in the market mechanisms and the regulatory mechanism. So India has a particular fairly well understood regulatory mechanism, whereas in my assessment, in countries around India, including Sri Lanka, have established regulatory mechanisms, but there are significant differences in the way these regulatory structures operate compared with India. Then, of course, the business model of the ownership of the interconnection. This has been a very contentious issue as to who will invest and who will manage. Can it be a private investment? Can it be a public-private partnership? Or is it going to be a traditional transmission utility investment, which is, and the cost of which is passed on to customers through the tariffs, through the transmission tariffs? Then would the countries share the investments, or the country that is at least in deficit at the time of signing the agreement would bear the entire cost of the interconnection? So these have been the issues that have been discussed, at least with regard to the India-Sri Lanka interconnection. I don't consider any of these issues to be as critical to the extent of not making the project happen, but these issues have not been resolved. And finally, the political thinking across the boundary is changing all the time, and particularly in Sri Lanka, the interconnection with India has been, I would say, bogged in various opinions of various parties, and perhaps at times, sometimes suspicion as to what will happen if India cuts off the interconnection. So I do not think that such things will happen, and India has obviously shown maturity in importing from Bhutan and Nepal, as well as having an interconnection with Bangladesh operating very successfully. So, but then these political fears have to be managed and have to be more carefully explained to the people at large, so that these differences are ironed out fairly early in the process. Otherwise, the interconnection will suffer. So I will stop there, perhaps to take some questions later on.
Thank you very much. You covered a lot of ground there in a very few minutes. Thank you for your insights. Some of the things I think poignant points that you made 30 years ago as you were coming out of school, you heard about the connectivity of the South Asia region, or at least between India and Sri Lanka. And of course, here we are 30 years later, we have an entire international conference around with great hopes that still continue. I think the discussion on the surplus and deficit between the two countries and how it's gone back and forth over time is also very interesting, and the dynamics of that, something that really should be explored. What encourages deficit to perk its head up in one place as opposed to the other and then shift back and forth? And just as importantly, is there actually a balance of, is it necessarily surplus on one side and deficit on the other, and then that changes hands? Or have we seen times when there's been deficit on both the Indian mainland and the Sri Lankan and in Sri Lanka? And the same with surplus, and what has sort of influenced that phenomenon if it's the case? But we'll get a chance to speak to that during the question and answer period. Let me now turn our attention to our next speaker. Anil, please, if you would.
Thank you, Mr. Satin. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me to give my view on this forum. Basically Nepal and India is already connected from the early 60s, right, starting from the Kosi Treaty, when Nepal is entitled for the 10 megawatt from the Katay power station, and gradually evolved through this power exchange agreement. We have an exchange agreement between Nepal and India on a reciprocal basis up to 50 megawatt. Then we have this Gandak Treaty. Then we also have this 12 to 16 megawatt entitlement from Tanapur. So basically, on a government-to-government basis, Nepal and India, it interconnected through a number of 11 kV, 30 kV, and 130 kV lines. But lately, in 2016, this Talgbar Muzaffarpur 400 kV line was commissioned, and this particular project, 400 kV, designed at 400 kV, was commissioned, and it was implemented on a public-private partnership. Like the portion in Nepal, the major shareholder was by the company which I am representing, Nepal Electricity Authority, and with some like Power Grid is also stakeholder, that ILFS, and Satluj Jal Vidyut. Similarly, on the Indian side, the major stakeholder is, I think, the Indian parties like Power Grid, Satluj Jal Vidyut, and we have a 10% stake in the Indian portion of the cross-border. So this Talgbar Muzaffarpur line was, although it was designed for 400 kV, in 2016 February it was operated at 130 kV line, and at that time we were importing around 80 megawatt. And just recent July, the line was commissioned at 210 kV. The plan was the cross-border transmission line. This particular cross-border line, cross-border line, was designed to be operated initially at 220 and lower than 40. So we have planned to commission this, upgrade this 400 kV line, this line to 400 kV by next year. The necessary transformer at our end is being undergoing. So with these various interconnections, right now Nepal is in a deficit. So we are importing to the tune of around, at the peak time, in the severe deficit time, we had imported around 500 megawatt. But at present, we are importing around 354. So basically, on a gradual basis, India and Nepal are interconnected. As we know that Nepal's only resources is hydro. As per government statistics, we have a potential of 42,000 megawatt. So it's a huge investment required. Though our peak demand at the moment is 1,500 megawatt, so gradually, based on the government target growth rate, so it will, next 10 or 15 years, it won't even cross 5,000 megawatt. So the only market for this 42,000 megawatt is obviously our near India. And for that, we need number of high interconnection lines. But interconnection lines, as far as the legal framework, we have this SAC framework agreement, and similarly the PTA, Power Trade Agreement with Nepal and India, where there is elaborate provisions that there is no non-discriminate access to the grid and provision for future development of transmission line. But what I consider one of the major issues, what I consider is that the recent guidelines issued by the government of India regarding this cross-border electricity trade, there is preferential benefit for the Indian private investment. Like if you want to import from Nepal, then if it's a private entity, then the major stakeholder should be the private entity. That is crowding out other private entities, like all the, so there's no advantage for other international private entity. So that is one of the issue. And second, in the guidelines, although this open for this trading, cross-border power trading through the power exchanges, where you can do trading on the basis of day-ahead market, but the day-ahead market is not allowed in that particular guidelines. Only the weekly is allowed. But although in the exchange, right at present, I think what I reckon is that most of the trading is done on demand on a day-ahead market. So these two issues need to be sought out so that more foreign direct investment, not only from the Indian private sector, but from other countries also could be managed. Thirdly, to facilitate this cross-border power trade, what I see is that, like if you want to trade power through to Bangladesh, obviously we have to go through the Indian grid. So the questions of open access naturally comes out. And secondly, when for a large-scale power export or import, naturally the grid, at least among the BBI in region, Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, and Nepal, the grid need to be synchronized. So for that, the grid code necessary policy, like for instance, policy harmonization, for instance, grid codes, policy standards, operating procedure, they need to be streamlined. And regarding the dispute resolution mechanism, since this cross-border involves tremendous amount of money, I mean, it's a commercial, it's a high risk. So dispute resolution management should be in place, like obviously in most of the standard contracts, you have this initially dispute resolution by amicable settlement, then arbitration. But I think in the Indian sector, you have this, you can refer the dispute to the regulatory commission as well, or the appellate court. So this all sort of needs to be sought out. And regarding the transmission planning, like for export of enormous, as I said earlier, we have a potential of 42,000 megawatt, but our demand is limited, very limited. So obvious market of this, our potential is India. And for this, you need number of link. And for this, I think there should be, between this BBI and the region, there should be a sort of a working group so that they can plan the transmission line for the internal in-country reinforcement, as well as the plan of additional cross-border line. What I want to share right now, as part of the power trade agreement, there's a mechanism of joint steering committee, joint working group, and these two joint working group has formed a joint technical team between Nepal and India. And in that committee, that Nepal Electricity Authority personnel and power grid personnel, they have sat together and they had a plan for a number of grid line, and through that, that study, a number of links for future development were identified. One was Gorakhpur, linked to Gorakhpur, the other one is Bareilly, Purnia, Lucknow. These are the links that was identified. So I think this should be regularly in place, and obviously this planning exercise is a very ongoing exercise, so this needs to be regularly updated. So with this, my views, I just stop here.
Anil, thank you very, very much. Great opportunity to hear more about what is going on in Nepal specifically, but also in your organization. I think you touched on some things that I found were stimulating for more thought and discussion. Of course, we never have enough time in these panels, but we hope that this stimulates some discussion, certainly amongst people in Nepal, but also in the region. What struck me, the transition lines to trade hydropower with India and Bangladesh continue to be a need. I know that we're going to get into a little bit of that here in the next speaker. Before we get there, though, you highlighted one of the things I think that a number of private sector folks, as well as development partners and country governments are working on, and that's the establishment of these day-ahead markets. we ourselves have realized the importance of day-ahead markets, and we're playing with a number of models that will help establish that. You may know that under the SARI program, the South Asia Regional Initiative for Energy, that we've been looking at the SARFTEX model for a regional energy exchange, and that is based on a day-ahead model. So it's good to hear that in Nepal you are sort of have some political will around that, because it will take some political will to make that happen. But thank you very much. Next up on our panel, again, is a colleague of mine, Sanjay Poudyal, who's the Deputy Resident Country Director of the Millennium Challenge Corporation in Kathmandu. And this, of course, segues right into Anil's comments about the need for some transmission lines. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that and what MCC is doing in Nepal, what your plans are for the future.
Thank you, Michael, for the opportunity. Hello, everybody. Really excited to be here today. So, as Michael alluded to, I'm from MCC, Millennium Challenge Corporation, headquartered in Washington. We have a standing program in Nepal, a $500 million program that envisages building a strong backbone network of high voltage transmission lines within the country. Before I talk more about the project, the technical aspects of the project, I think perhaps maybe I could share with you some of our insights with respect to the South Asian region as far as connectivity is concerned. So a lot of progress has been made, obviously, everybody knows that over the last decade or more, but I think a lot needs to be done. So for instance, if you look at some of the data points around connectivity, the total generation, the total installed capacity in the South Asian region is about 340 gigawatts right now. The amount that is actively traded across the countries in South Asia is only 2,500 megawatts. So that's about less than 1% of the total installed capacity. And so I think in terms of connectivity, that data itself gives you an indication that there's a long road ahead. I think there should be significant effort towards increasing that number. I think 0.75% of total installed capacity being traded is probably not something that a lot of people would be happy about. So I think a number that I think should be aspired to should be, in my opinion, should be in about 10, 15, 20% range of the total installed capacity, and that's how much I think that is possible to trade under optimal conditions in this region. I think electricity is such a important commodity, and I think because of that, it is looked at very strategically. But I think from the perspective of enhancement of connections and trade, I think it should probably be looked at as a tradable commodity rather than a strategic commodity. I think that's one of our views of what's happening within the region that we could glean from. Some of the other things that I think that we've noted, I think is there's a tremendous amount of opportunity, I think, in reduction in greenhouse gas emissions in the region by exploiting the hydropower potential of some of the countries. And I think that should definitely be a vision, I think, for the region collectively. Nepal and Bhutan have huge amount of export potential. I think numbers indicate that in the longest run, they will probably not even need 15% of their total potential generation. 85%, I think, if they're able to exploit their resources, their clean hydropower resources, they should be able to export about 85% of what they produce within country. And that should go a long way in carbon sequestration and greenhouse gas emission reductions and things of that nature, which I think should be part of the goal. Given a lot of the climate change effect that we're seeing in the Himalayas, I think that should be a goal. Now let me come back a little bit to what we're doing in Nepal with respect to the MCC Compact. So the focus of the compact, MCC Compact in Nepal, is to invest in its transmission sector, obviously. And the pinnacle, I think, of this project is the interconnection with the Indian grid. Even though 99.9% of the investment is happening within the Nepal borders, the linchpin, if I could say that, the linchpin of the entire project is the interconnection with the Indian grid, and the expectation that that is going to enhance regional integration. The compact is valued at about $500 million, with Nepal government adding on another 130 million. So there is a strong commitment from the host government that we are very excited about. It's certainly a lot of money, I think, for any country, and for a country of the economy of size of Nepal, it's certainly a significant amount of money. And so a total of $630 million that we have in enhancing Nepal's transmission backbone and the connectivity to India. Now, one of the unique attributes to one of the unique attributes to the MCC Compact is that it's predicated on a strict 5-year time frame. So, if we look at the region, it's very prevalent that a lot of these projects suffer a significant amount of time and cost overruns, and so it's a challenge for us, and that's why I guess our middle name itself is Challenge, Millennium Challenge Corporation. But we've taken this step to not just make an investment in Nepal, but try and leave an example of how a project of this magnitude could be completed within time, and be able to impart that the set of best practices that allows us to be able to embark on such a large undertaking and have the ambition to complete it within time and within budget. And so it's not just the money. I think it's the practice, the legacy. I think that we're hoping will come to fruition. One of the other reasons why MCC decided to invest in Nepal's transmission networks is because what we realized was that there was a lot of focus from within country by the government as well as by the private sector in investing in large hydropower, mid-sized hydropower generation projects. However, there wasn't as much focus on investing in transmission. And so we identified this missing link within Nepal's backbone that we thought was crucial. If all of the generation projects that are being built right now are to be delivered to market, the missing link is the transmission network, without which the investors, the developers of the generation projects are not going to get returns on their investment. And so that missing link is something that we identified, and we negotiated with the host government, for which there has been an agreement that's been signed in September 2017. So I think the intent of the intent of wanting to fill this missing link is twofold. I think in the near term, I think Nepal's ability to Nepal will be able to utilize this particular cross-border interconnection in being able to import significant amount of its own domestic needs. And then in the next 3 to 4 to 5 years, when Nepal is expected to have surplus based on a lot of the generation projects that are being constructed within country, that same line can be utilized then to export clean hydropower energy to India. So it's a win-win situation for both the countries, with the commercials having to be worked out. Let's see. This is a very blessed region in our sense when we look at the unique generation and capacity mix. So India and Bangladesh obviously are primarily coal and gas market, whereas Bhutan and Nepal, as I mentioned earlier, are predominantly hydro. So and there are natural complementarities within the region. For instance, if you look at the demand-supply cycle. So for instance, the demand in the region tends to vary on an hour-to-hour basis, on a day-to-day basis, month-to-month basis, season-to-season basis. And there's natural complementarities that can be taken advantage of to fulfill this variation of demand. For instance, Saturday is a holiday in Nepal, whereas Sunday is a holiday in India. So naturally, because of that, there are variations in demand. I mean, on a holiday, there's lesser power need to power offices and so forth. And so that's just one example. There are obviously many other seasonal sort of examples. Nepal has huge amount of surplus in the wet season, which also happens to be the summer season. And India, obviously, being a tropical climate in the summer season, requires a huge amount of energy to fuel its air conditioners and many other needs. So I think these complementarities are there to be taken advantage of. And so I think that's just one unique attribute of this region that we see as a crucial sort of an enabler for investments. One of the other things that we've also noted is that the trade, the cross-border trade in energy is not just about meeting each other's electricity demand, but it also can be, if it's utilized to its optimum capability, it can also help reduce future capital investments in future generation plants. And studies indicate that if this region optimizes its regional trade capabilities, that can lead to roughly about $17 billion of reduced capital investment needs for new generation plants in individual countries. So that's a huge number, I think, that I think excites us when we look at these data. And so, as far as policy modifications are concerned, there's a lot of talk about policies not being conducive to investments, to better connectivity. But I think there are genuine steps that have been taken to smoothen out policies, to improve regulatory frameworks. And it's interesting to note that when you export and import electricity, I mean, the laws of science don't change across borders. I mean, electricity is electricity regardless of which country it is flowing in. But if you have regulators that are focusing only within their country, then the power of the regulators obviously stop at the border. And so you're dealing with a commodity that goes across border, but with regulations that stop at the border. So I think, therein lies an opportunity to, I think, have a common sort of a regulatory platform that is not just intra-country, but it's regional, where it can look at regulatory aspects on a multilateral basis. And so, anyways, I think these are some of the thoughts that I had, and thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Sanjay. Some very insightful points. I'm fascinated by the fact that in 3 to 5 years, Nepal will have a surplus, and that at some point they'll be trading up to 85% of their production across borders. Those are some pretty phenomenal numbers. But we can only hope that, in fact, that's even half of that is going to end up being a very, not just a plus up for Nepal, but very good for the South Asia region. I think you raised another interesting point that the investments the United States and Nepal together are making through the MCC Compact will not just enhance the connectivity between Nepal and India, but there are ramifications for other countries in the region, namely Bhutan and the ones that certainly trade in the hydro. But we're hoping that even those transmission lines eventually reach down far enough into India so that the thermal power generation is also being traded along those same lines. Thank you very much for your comments. Very insightful. I want to turn now to Deepesh Nanda. As I mentioned earlier, he's the Chief Executive Officer of Gas Power Systems South Asia General Electric Power. Hoping that you will give us some insight into the private sector thinking on this. And I'd like you to think about sort of focusing in on one thing that has come up time and time again. We've done a lot of talking about the regulatory framework, about policies and the legal framework that kind of drives trade, drives all of it, including generation, but also trade and distribution. If you can talk a little bit about, in your experience, the power planning. And is there a need for, do you see a need for something like regional transmission regional transmission planning that can aggregate the transmission planning that's taking place in each individual country? Is there value in that at a regional level? And do you have impressions about what might work in trying to tool up a model like that?
Sure.
Please.
Yes, my name is Deepesh, Nanda, and I take care of GE's gas business for South Asia. To begin with, I would actually include Pakistan and Afghanistan also in this particular discussion. With that, it gives us a market size of 1.8 billion people to cater to. And the other comment is that how I wish this room was with more people listening to a discussion of this sort. This is just kind of symptomatic of the fact that the interest in the regional connectivity is at a very low ebb. I mean, the fact that the data Sanjay just shared, only 2.5 gigawatt out of a market of 340 install base is actually being traded between countries, which is abysmal, which is actually nothing. While I do appreciate the needs of countries like Nepal, but I'll give you my perspective from the private sector as to what's exactly happening on the ground when it comes to capacity addition. So let's begin in this order. So let's first go to Sri Lanka. GE has 100% market share for all the power generation in that country. For the last 3 years, or actually for the last 5 years, the government has been contemplating to add anywhere between 350 megawatt to 1 gigawatt of new power generation capacity. Tenders have come out, bidding has happened, but then there isn't a process in place to release these orders and have these plants built in a timely fashion. As a result, the common man is left without access to electricity, or at least there is a percentage out there who don't have access to electricity. And unfortunately, at times, our ability to raise dissent is very low. So people will suffer in silence. They will not come out on the roads and protest that they don't have access to electricity. We are just like that. So in that country, we have an office there. We've worked with the government closely, but we don't see much happening in terms of timely addition of electricity. Now let's move to India, for example. In India, we've kind of reached a point of saturation on thermal power. What is getting executed right now in terms of new capacity is what got ordered in the last 10 years. There is an issue in terms of the policy with things like fuel being a pass-through, but there's massive capacity addition on wind and solar. So again, let's talk about states like, say, Tamil Nadu, which the gentleman talked about earlier. That 30 years back, there was this impression that Sri Lanka has more electricity and hence South India will take that electricity, and now it's flipped. Now Tamil Nadu definitely has more electricity, especially in the wind category. You want this region to be clean. I mean, the other day I was seeing a tweet of President Trump in which he tweeted the map of the world with a heat map which had India, Bangladesh, Pakistan as bright red to indicate the level of pollution in this part of the world as compared to the United States. And then he had a comment to make. One way to solve that is to increase the amount of wind and solar and hydro. So if you have Tamil Nadu today, which has more wind power, it's a pity that we haven't been able to dispatch that wind power to Sri Lanka. The case for regional connectivity is definitely made. I think we should have the courage to challenge the policymakers as to why are we not doing it. We also talked about the economics of this. So if you add more wind and solar to the generation mix, your cost of electricity comes down. 60-70% is going to be thermal. Thermal is extremely volatile. All of us are waiting for 4th of November to see what happens with the US sanctions on oil prices, because this part of the world buys natural gas linked to oil prices. And if oil prices shoot up, we are a net importing region, not just a country. So in India, there is more capacity at this point in time, and we are trying to see as to what has to be done. But I don't know why the policymakers are not thinking of dispatching this much of electricity to the neighboring countries. In India, for example, nobody's even going to attempt thinking of, can we supply electricity to Pakistan? And I would even question that as to why not get into supplying electricity to Pakistan or to Afghanistan. Now let's move to Bangladesh. There's massive capacity addition underway in Bangladesh. I think the Prime Minister of Bangladesh has done a brilliant job in terms of opening up the sector. They have a policy to invite unsolicited bids, which was approved by the parliament. And at this point in time, we are adding anywhere between 2 to 3 gigawatt of electricity. So that's another, but then this power is coming at a price in the sense that they're importing natural gas at a price of $7, $8, whereas you have power available, you know, in India, which is at a far lesser price point. Now, early steps have been made to transmit power from India to Bangladesh, but then there are things like the private sector is not clear as to who's going to bear the expense for the HVDC connectivity. Now, the private sector is more than happy to make its own investment as long as there is a policy which says that we will compensate you through a power purchase agreement. And if the power purchase agreement is backed by some sort of a sovereign guarantee, then you'll have financing available for these projects. Then the whole thing starts becoming real. Ultimately, I'll close my comments by saying that you know, cost is a big driver, is a big motivator, because it impacts even the ability of the common man to pay for electricity. This argument needs to be made, you know, and we need to actually shout from rooftops that there is enough economic merit in connecting the grids of India, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Nepal, because ultimately that's going to reduce the cost of electricity. Lastly, the business of electricity, to me, also has a huge moral angle to it. This is not a transactional business at all. It changes people's lives. So what I would urge is to challenge ourselves as to why this is not happening, and in our own spheres, make this as a priority item at every forum that we can. And for companies like GE, we'll be more than willing to take the step forward if it comes to making investments, advocacy, policy shaping, financing, doing these projects. We're here to do that.
Thank you very, very much, Deepak. There's some very insightful pieces there, and also some very provocative, if I may say so. We're, of course, very glad to see GE in the region investing strongly in a number of places. 100% market share of power generation in Sri Lanka is quite significant, and we'll look forward to talking with you about how we can extrapolate your technical expertise and your wisdom in the rest of the region. The massive capacity in solar and wind is a place I think that everybody's interested in. It lowers cost, certainly lowering cost now of the actual end product, but we know that into the future, the inputs are cheap. Solar, the photon that takes, 8.3 minutes to get to the Earth from sun, all that part's free. It's only after it gets here that we have to start spending money to get it out to the consumer. And so if the basic input is free, there's some incentive there to start thinking about that as the basic component of energy generation. And I know GE's been a great driver in that sense. The cost is a big driver, kind of an obvious statement. The economic merit of connecting the grid throughout South Asia is probably a provocative idea, but it's something that merits consideration certainly into the future. And it would be fascinating to have that conversation because there's all kinds of hurdles in that planning. But thank you very much for your insights and the private sector's experience, because we know that moving forward, there's going to be very little success along the way without fully engaging the private sector. Our private sector brings a lot of things, not the least of which are access to finance that not every government can always come up with on their own, but certainly because they have a lot of the technical expertise and they have experience in a number of countries in the region and other places in the world that they can then bring to the South Asian context. And that means that we can gain a lot of efficiencies simply by following those leads and not having to make similar mistakes that other places in the world have made as they try to interconnect through the electricity grid. I want to introduce our last speaker today. As I mentioned earlier, the Director General of PowerCell, Power Division, Ministry of Power, Energy, and Mineral Resources in the government of Bangladesh. We're very, very happy to have you with us. Mohammad Hossain, please.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, audience. Let me introduce further my office, because my part was missing in your manual, as I have confirmed at the 11th hour. My office, PowerCell, is basically the think tank of the Power Ministry. We do provide policy support. We make plan for the power sector. In addition to that, we do coordinate among the power entities of the government. We do monitor their activities. My role is to lead this team. I'm happy to inform you. In fact, I take the pride that the MU that has been signed between India and Bangladesh back in 2010, I have initialed that MU. The MU that has signed with Nepal has been drafted by my office. And also we have a tripartite MU between Bangladesh, India and Bhutan at final stage, and just waiting for the signing ceremony that has also been prepared by my office. Having said that, in fact, I will not add anything new because I've got the points from my predecessors, respected panelists. Let me start with Michael. You are right that definitely there are challenges for the way I take this thing, that there is an opportunity. When you have to achieve those opportunities, you have to face challenges. And that we have at least proved that we could overcome the challenges if we have the will, the political wills, and as well as you have the intention to do better for the nation. As just Deepesh was telling, that Bangladesh has in fact proved that tremendously. Back in 2009, we have a generation capacity of 3,200 megawatt. Now we have a generation capacity of 20,000 megawatt. And as far as this cross-border trade, there have been definitely challenges. We have a long debate with this, at least the SAARC nations, that whether we should go by bilateral ways or the regional ways, with the rationale that, okay, bilateral agreements will be a building blocks for future regional trade. We have started with bilaterally, and now Bangladesh is importing more than 1,600 megawatt, and in future it will be, at least within next 2 years, it will be 3,500 megawatt. We have established cross-border with Beramara and Baharampur and Tripura and Kumilla. While we have been doing it, in fact, the way I see the future challenges, as Mr. Tilak was also telling, that we should not consider ourselves as only a receiver or the other as only the provider. In fact, we have a very good diversity in terms of seasonal diversity, even the round-the-clock diversity. And even right now, though, we are importing 1,600 megawatt from India. At the moment, we have, winter has not yet started, but we have a surplus capacity of around 6,000 megawatt. And in fact, if you want to maximize your economic scale, I think we should think in that way that let us don't think it's only buying, importing or exporting. Let us feel that it's a trading. It's trading for from either side. And that is how why we think that in future we may face more challenges for going for long-term contract, because that will obstruct us to in fact utilize our own mega projects. Like we are implementing some big coal-based power plants, nuclear power plants of 1,600 megawatt, 2,000 megawatt. So when winter comes, the demand comes down to say 4,500. So we can't, in fact, shut down those mega projects. On the other hand, we will have a contract with importing. So the solution is that, as Anil was telling, that we should have access to the power exchange. We should deal with the demand of the day, I mean the day-ahead market. So in fact, a lot of work has been done, particularly thanks USAID for this SARI project. They have done a good number of policy supports, like what we are talking about, grid harmonization, policies, regulatory harmonization, also this SURFEX. So only now we need to, in fact, go for implementing those things, and the member states should adopt those, in fact, policies and plans. Most importantly is in fact, I was just giving the attention to the morning plenary session. So probably one lady from Bhutan, she was telling the most important is connecting the people. And that is very important. And in this, you see the whole conference is connecting. And connecting, as a technical person, I can talk about connecting the grid or road connection, but most important is the human connectivity. Why that is, you see, still when we do sign some contract, our people have a lot of you see confusions, questions. So this is very important that we should patch up those mass people for our this partnership. Otherwise, it will be in future in challenge. So I think I have covered most of this. So one thing Deepesh was telling regarding this solar and it's not only the maximizing the generation or providing the green energy. Rather, you see this solar wind can supplement each other. You see, even Bangladesh is a very good in solar, but we don't have wind. But if you want to have a round-the-clock generation mix, you should have both. So that is why we should have interconnection for all this renewable energy. As he was telling that we are very much open to any sort of cross-border trade. Regarding the policy, the way I see, you see the particularly the bureaucracy or the political was, if you want to say something no, you say there is no policy. But policy is not a barrier for any nation. The government can do, undo, and then they can adopt those in the policy. So the main thing is that you have to have political wills, trustworthiness. I think that will be the main factor. Let me stop here. I will definitely answer to any questions. Thank you.
Mr. Hossain, thank you very, very much. A couple points that you touched on, I think, are incredibly pertinent and ring true for everybody, but it was nice to hear about 6,000 megawatts of surplus capacity, and we're looking forward to that being maximized in its trade across the region, because there's a lot of places in the region that could take advantage of that. And of course, we've realized for a long time the importance of the regional exchanges, the opportunity to trade under best practices with a fair regulatory climate, good policy that encourages investment and sustains that investment so that there's not only a level playing field, but the consumer is protected. That's based on free market economics and also a fair rule of law sort of approach that we believe also should include some sort of, I think it was Mr. Anil who made reference to the importance of dispute resolution in the region. And that, I think, is a piece of what you're talking about, not to put words in your mouth, but I think they go hand in hand, and we recognize the importance of that. Thank you for touching on those important issues. We have about 4 hours and 20 minutes left. Just kidding. We have about 25 minutes left in this session, and I would like to open it up to some questions. There are questions that have both been posed online through the Slido.com site, and we have a few of them tooled up for us to consider. And then we'll get to taking a couple hands in the audience for those of you who, and I'm going to kind of spread these questions out according to who might want to field them, but I want to make sure everybody gets a question to answer. So if there's something that rings true for you, please let us know. You can see here that they were tooled up with specific people in mind. So feel free, if you don't want to answer that question or it's not something in your bailiwick, pass it on. But the question that was posed for Mr. Tilak is what kind of cross-border energy trade investments is Sri Lanka looking for in the next 5 years? And that'll be interesting to hear with General Electric in the room.
Sri Lanka is planning for possibly a 500 megawatt interconnection. It may be even 1,000 megawatt. And we are looking at an investment of in the range of about $400 to $700 million, particularly because as a marine connection, the interconnection is more expensive than elsewhere. So $400 to $700 million if you have, bring it into Sri Lanka and build this power highway.
I mean, not to be too critical about how the process works in that country, but I'll be brief. Okay, I will bring in that investment. And then the first question that I'll be told is that CEP will not take my offer because this isn't a part of the generation plan. Then we'll have to redo the generation plan, and that's a process by itself. After that is done, you again go back to the government. They said, look, we don't have a process of taking it directly unsolicited, so let's do a bidding process. Then the bidding process will start. Once the bids come in, there is an evaluation committee which will evaluate it forever. And at the end of it, there will be a winner who will be announced. Once that winner is announced, an intent of award, not the award intent, but the intent to award is released to the bidder, and all other competitors are given 2 weeks notice to go and contest that award. Everybody practically goes to court. Then the courts jump in, and it goes, there is an attorney general who is consulted by the Prime Minister's office or the power minister who does not want to give a comment. They will wait forever. Then the courts come in. It goes to the apex court. It goes to Supreme Court. Supreme Court meets, one judge is absent. It happens 5 times. End of it, it'll be 10 years before the project will happen. I think we need to challenge that as to how do we bring in practicality of giving electricity to our people. If you don't get me wrong, this is first-hand experience. And I've been running this business for South Asia for the last 10 years.
You want me to respond? Yes, okay, quickly.
Without it being necessarily a political debate and putting you on the hot seat here, I mean, the private sector does come in with some concerns.
Yes,
those are, I think, practical and they're justified. But we're not asking you for the definitive answers and how you're going to make it all better. But what's your impression?
Well, procedures are established in countries. So I can answer some of your concerns. I think you are particularly referring to one project which is bogged down in various legal arguments for the last couple of years at least. But all projects have not been so bad. But when it comes to cross-border energy trade, it is included in the generation plan as a scenario. So what is first required is a decision, is a policy decision for it to be implemented. Then, of course, given the regulations, it has to be, although I, very simplistically said, bring your money and invest, there has to be a competitive process because that's how it is established. So, of course, there is a separate procedure for unsolicited proposals as well. But here, I doubt very much whether Sri Lanka's first interconnection will go on the unsolicited route because there are quite a lot to be learned as to how it will be done. So I personally expect it to be done as a conventional project, as Bangladesh did their first one, as Bhutan did their first one, as a conventional projects agreement between the two governments or between the two power entities. But exactly how it is financed is where the opportunity will be for the private sector to participate, and of course contracts for experts in the field who are not many around are always open.
Thank you, Mr. Tilak, and thank you, Deepesh. This is not easy territory, right? But if it were easy territory, we wouldn't be here. And what I think is important to take away from this is that there are challenges, and everybody recognizes that, but the challenges can be dealt with. I like to think that the United States has some of the tools and experiences to help us address these, and in the work we're all going to do going forward, our private sector entities involved, along with our government entities, I like to think that we'll find solutions to these, because there's certainly a need for streamlining and making them more efficient, and that's in everybody's best interest. Is my phone ringing? Okay. So let me just turn to a second question, if I can sort of target it to Sanjay. My phones aren't ringing. It's not my phone. Okay. Let me see if we can talk over this. Sanjay, what kind of investments are required to integrate the cross-border energy trade into the South Asian region? If you could talk about that from the perspective of what MCC is focused on with its Nepal compact.
Certainly I can make an attempt. me to talk over this, but sorry. I think we found the root cause. Okay, so as far as what kind of investments are required, I think you know, I think there is definitely a deficit in terms of financing capabilities in the region with respect to just, if you just look at the public capital. So I'm a huge proponent of private investments in infrastructure and also in the power sector, for that matter. And I think the region as a whole, I think, has enjoyed increasing investments in the energy sector, and they will continue to come. I don't think money is an issue. With better policies, well-run competition, you know, transparent pricing, timely payments. These are the enablers. These are the enabling environment, I think, formulas that I think will bring in more and more investments. But I think you know, risks have to be addressed for investments to come in, especially for private capital. I think risks have to be identified and allocated on a very clear basis as far as who takes what risk, whether it's the government or it's the private investor or the developer that takes that particular risk. And unless and until there's better clarity in these things, I think investments will be difficult. But as I alluded to earlier, I think there's definitely a lot of success stories in India, I think in the power sector, as far as private capital having come in to complement the public capital. Now, I guess the nature of some of the projects will lend itself to the fact that not all projects are conducive to private investments. I think some projects bring additional elements of complexity which the private sector is not able to absorb in terms of risk appetite. So for instance, a huge amount of displacement, resettlement, I think are deterrents for private investments. Unless the government takes that side of the responsibility and says and takes care of, you know, the resettlement and the land acquisition part, the private sector will not be, you know, I think excited about bringing in its capital. If you look at public-private partnerships, you know, the uniqueness of the public-private partnership investments, I think, is that over time, I think governments have realized that you know, there is a strong sense of not just financing capabilities, but there's a strong sense of managerial capability, on-time delivery capability that the private sector brings to the power sector, which the government may not necessarily have. On the other hand, what the government is good at doing is planning for the sector, making sure that permits are issued on time, making sure that approvals are done on time, and I think this is a match that has seemed to work quite well, with both sides having figured out what their you know, USPs are, the key contributing factors are. So I guess those are the things around those are the things around investments. I think. Also, some of the issues around policies to attract more investment, I would say, are you know, open access policies, where you know, the lines are not necessarily dedicated for a particular generation plant, but are open to you know, providing access to other generators of electricity, and I think that then lends itself to a fair and open system where everybody has access to. So buyers and sellers. It's a market-driven approach where a pool of buyers are talking to a pool of sellers and transacting through a open, fair, common network of transmission. I think that I think there's a lot of investments and policy reforms that are required to enable that to happen. And I think, you know, for the region, in my opinion, what that means is, as I mentioned earlier, the amount of energy traded as compared to the total installed capacity is less than 1%. And I think similarly, if you look at the per capita consumption of energy in this region, I think it's around 500 or 600 kilowatt hour per capita. which I think is about 6 times less than the global average. I think the global average stands at around 3,500 or 4,000 kilowatt hour per capita. So, you know, these are the metrics that I think you can measure, you know, by making sure that the investments are being channelized properly and that the policies are being reformed properly and that there's true enabler to cross-border trade. And over time, as you see these indicators improve, I think that's when you know that you've really made a difference. So thank you.
Thank you, Sanjay, very much. We have time for a couple more offline, and then we'll open to the audience for 2. So let's call it. We have 3 more questions. I think that'll take up our about 15, 20 minutes left, and I don't want to go over because I know it's we're quickly approaching holiday season. I wanted to ask Anil about Nepal and how they expect to manage emerging market demand from India and Bangladesh. I know you touched on this very eloquently in your opening comments, but if you could focus in on that piece that really requires Nepal to more fully engage in regional trade, and what's in it for you, aside from just selling the goods at the end of the day, once you generate that surplus, 3 to 5 years we said, 85%, then what is your sort of strategy for entering into that marketplace, and where do you see some of the barriers?
As you see, many projects are presently under construction. Like 2000, we are expecting 2000 addition in our system. Presently, our installed capacity is just 1000 megawatt, whereas 2000 megawatt is under construction. So in 2 years' time, we are expecting surplus during the wet season. Now, I'm not talking about the dry season. During the wet season, we are expecting at least to the tune of 500 to 600 megawatt surplus during the wet season. So, since we have also this Talkibar-Muzaffarpur cross-border line, which is expected to be commissioned at 400 kV with a carrying capacity of 1,000 megawatt. So, I mean, you have that infrastructure, the line is there, 500 to 600 megawatt is the surplus capacity. So, I think there's an opportunity we can be realized in this. But as far as the long-term firm demand from India and Nepal, for that, obviously one has to be in the least generation exchange plan, because hydropower is a lumpy investment. The investor will be seeking a fair return. So for the seasonal part, I think there's not much of a, as far as the infrastructure is concerned, there's not a question. For India, but for Bangladesh, either there should be a wheeling arrangement, the open access, or there could be a back-to-back arrangement, selling to India, and India selling to DAC, and the back-to-back arrangement. That sort of things can be worked out.
Yeah, thank you, Anil, and I think it speaks highly to this. We're seeing a lot of bilateral trade, or we're seeing it emerging anyways, and some of it's very fluid between countries. But that kind of sort of strategic thinking, I think, will lead us to a more multilateral trading environment, where where fixed, exchanges will be important, but also where there's going to have to be a good amount of political will. Mohammad, Hossain, if I could just ask you quickly to address this concept. This may not be in your wheelhouse, and you'll forgive me for putting you on the spot, but I can't leave this session without kind of making reference to this. Given your, Bangladesh is a place near and dear to my heart. I spent a couple years based there in Dhaka. Love the people and love the country. And so I'm concerned about things like air quality that we also think about here in Delhi, and impact on public health and these sorts of things. And so that leads us down the road in the energy discussion about how we integrate more renewables. In Bangladesh, where we are very driven by gas and oil markets, and energy is, in some way or another, especially in big cities, part of the polluting problems. How are you seeing this issue with respect to integrating renewable energies into your mix? How are you seeing that juxtaposed against your current electricity generating and consumption capacities?
You see, though we are the least contributor to climate change, we are the worst sufferer of this climate change effect. And given that, in our in fact policy, we have made a policy for the renewable energy, where 10% of the generation mix will come from the renewable energy. And though we don't have any more, so much diversified resources. The proven resource is the solar. And you know that we have explored our best in the solar. We have installed 5.3 million solar home system in the country, which is providing electricity to more than 25 million, I should say, underprivileged, ultra-poor people, because they are living in the islands, remote areas where grid is not available. We are trying to scale those up through mini grids. And as you know that Bangladesh is the most populous country in the world, so land is a very scarce resource. So grid-tied solar is very challenging for us yet. We have awarded as good as 2,000 megawatt LOI or signed the contracts, but the developers couldn't come up because of these land issues. So the government has already allocated lands in different parts of the country where we'll award those to the private developers for solar park. And in order to meet this demand, basically that is why we are focusing on to the regional connectivity. Just you have heard from Anil that the dry season, they are having shortage of electricity. And wet season, they are having surplus. We are at the reverse side. We have in the dry season, we are surplus. And in the wet season, we are deficit. So I think, you see, we should have a holistic approach in the region. And in that way, we can address this clean energy. We can have our best utilization of these regional resources. Thank you.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, that holistic approach that you speak of, I think it has to be the driving motivator for so much of us, because as you highlighted along with Anil, you have this seasonal component of both deficit and surplus. And I want to say, without patting ourselves on the back, that that's kind of where we're coming from as well. The United States and our investments here in South Asia are opportunities to support governments in their initiatives to drive better energy security, is really around using the collective power of South Asia and how they both generate and consume electricity in an integrated fashion. I mean, that's what connectivity at the end of the day is all about. We recognize that we are stronger if we work together on providing some of these key inputs to productivity, to quality of life and well-being, and to economic growth and development. And there's no, in my opinion, I like to think you all agree with me because we're in the same sector, but in my opinion, there's really no better way to start that off than by addressing it in the power sector. And many of the other sectors that we think about and hope to develop and expand opportunities for people will come about in large part because the power sector has played a strong role in driving economic growth and development. Before we close, I want to get if there are questions in the audience, one or two. We're running up against the clock here. I can see my boss back here, Susan. She's perusing the ground for any of you that like to ask a question. But if there's one or two questions in the audience, please raise your hand. I hope some of them were answered on the screen because the internet slido.com was where all of you had access. But if there's anybody who didn't get a chance to access that, please raise your hand. Oh, thank goodness, we got one.
I have the question to Mr. Sanjay, that as you have mentioned about the grid connectivity between the India and Nepal, and the MCC is mainly focused on that. What's your take on the Indian that regulations that gave the preferential treatment to us, the Indian investment? What's your take? And this question also I just want to put to Mr. Deepesh also.
Well, thank you for the question. So my understanding of the regulations is, first of all, they're still in draft stage. They have not been released or approved yet. And there are guidelines that have been issued, and on the basis of these guidelines is what the regulations are going to be drafted on. We've had conversations with the Regulatory Commission here in Delhi just similar to your curiosity, we were also curious as to try and understand, what some of these principles in these documents meant, and so we did get some clarity. But I think, by and large, it is still a subject of discussion from what we understand, and that there could be further modifications to the regulations based on feedback that is received from other countries that wish to do power trade with India. For instance, I believe there are comments from Nepal that have been shared with India. There have been comments from Bangladesh, I believe, that have been shared with India on this. So my understanding is that the regulations are still under discussion and not approved yet. I think the intent with which I think the initial drafting was done, I think we should look at it, on neutral terms, first of all, in the sense that I think there may have been some genuine interest in wanting to draft it that way. But I think there is some logic in wanting to look at these investments on a case-by-case basis, and I think that's what the regulation is trying to say. Rather than giving blanket approvals, I think some of these investments may merit a case-by-case review, and I think that's my understanding what the regulations were trying to say, which are, again, I think in my understanding, in draft stage. If anybody else wants to comment, please feel free.
The deals which have happened of late that we've seen between India and Bangladesh, Bangladesh is offering a PPA, and that's when the financing of the project becomes viable. And the Bangladesh PPA is super strong, I'd say. I'd say one of the best in South Asia, because it offers some sort of a sovereign guarantee. The issue that we're trying to solve is who's going to build the transmission line. And I think the private sector is open, but then, transmission and distribution is one segment which has not been liberalized, like how the generation part has been liberalized in most of our countries here. And then the next question, third, is how will you compensate the investment that goes into the transmission segment? So if you have to build an HVDC line, I think both governments, in this case, India and Bangladesh, are clear that we'll have to build an HVDC line. And they're also willing to give a path. I'm sure Mr. Mohammad can comment and talk about this more eloquently. And I think the next step that will happen is they will come up with a financial model as to how that investment gets paid back through some sort of a tariff mechanism. The good news among all this is that there is enough capital to be invested, and it's available. It's available through international agencies, multilaterals, ECAs, the private sector bank. AIIB could be a fantastic avenue because it's very contextual in terms of having projects in South Asia, which is their mandate. So this is the kind of framework that I think will evolve for these large projects to take off.
Thank you very much, Deepesh. We're going to take one more question from the audience, if in fact that exists.
Continuing on the regulatory theme, question for probably most relevant to Anil and Sanjay as well. I understand a new regulator has been established in Nepal in the electricity sector. How do you expect this will impact or change the scenario regarding cross-border electricity trade between Nepal, India, and possibly even Bangladesh? Or how do you think it should? Thank you.
Well, the Nepal Electricity Act, which was just enacted last year, and it's been operationalized. I think the government is going to form the Electricity Commission quite soon. I think so. The reform in Nepal's power sector will generally evolve. So I think since the power sector in India is much more developed, so I think Nepal also will follow on similar lines. So I think all the interest of all the stakeholders will be taken care of by this regulatory commission. So I think that's what I can I
I just want to make a comment there quickly, is that the Indian power sector for the last 10 years is going through a lot of strain. So you may want to reconsider if you want to really look at the Indian model for Nepal, I would probably direct you more towards the Bangladesh model.
Thank you very, very much. If there are really no closing comments from our panel here, please.
Deepesh tempted me to at least announce one very good news that we have already opened up transmission for the private sector. So this is another milestone for Bangladesh. Thank you.
Look at that, we inked a deal right here. Okay. Thank you very much to all of you. I want to say thank you to the audience. This has been an incredibly productive and fruitful conversation in my book. I've learned an awful lot. You have shared some perspectives from your countries, but also from your personal experience, which I think is just beyond value. I also want to say that the United States, through the U.S. Agency for International Development and our colleagues in the Department of State and a number of other agencies in the government, continue their efforts to support governments on their road to energy security. It's an important element of what we do and our policy, our vision here in South Asia to help institutionalize a stable, prosperous well-being in the South Asian population. That's a goal of the United States and has been for a long time and it'll continue to be. In the electricity and power sector, for sure, we continue to be a partner and we look forward to opportunities to work with the intellectuals like yourselves who bring an open-mindedness, who bring an understanding of the context and have very plausible and feasible answers as to how we solve some of these challenges going into the future. So I want to thank all of you individually and collectively for your time here today and for your very frank discussion. I want to thank everybody in the audience for sticking with us until Friday afternoon at 5 o'clock on an upcoming holiday weekend when people are flying and driving out of town in record numbers. It is fantastic of you people to stick around and be a part of this because I believe this was the best panel of the entire 2 days. Tell me if I'm wrong. And finally, let me just say that for those of you in the region who are celebrating and those of you who are not, a very, very, very blessed holiday, prosperity, good health, happiness, well-being, and peace to you and your families on this upcoming Diwali. I wish you all extraordinary blessings. Namaste.
Okay, great. So Michael has thanked everybody, and I would like to thank Michael for being a wonderful moderator. And now to present the E3 certificates as mementos in recognition of your presence as speakers, I would like to invite my colleague Susan to come on stage and hand over the mementos, please. Say cheese. Okay. After this wonderful picture, let's all just have some tea and coffee and refresh ourselves. After 15 minutes, we all would gather here at 5:15 for the concluding remarks and looking to the future. Thank you. For tea and coffee is arranged at the back of this hall. You can just go to the back side and have your tea and coffee. Thank you.